So now we have the case, but we need additional evidence. So now I do this whole elaborate scheme. He believed we were moving 67 kilos of cocaine.
In Hartford, Connecticut today, a verdict which prosecutors say will break the back of one of the country's biggest mafia operations.
The patriarchal crime family has been making headlines for decades, and now, after a string of recent arrests, has been all but decimated.
The FBI agent who decimated the ranks of organized crime in New England.
Welcome to Heroes Behind Headlines. Today's guest is legendary FBI Special Agent and undercover operative Mike McGowan. Over the course of his illustrious career, Mike has worked 50 undercover cases, which is completely unprecedented. He's busted international drug traffickers, including the infamous El Chapo Guzman, head of the Sinaloa cartel, contract killers, bank robbers, corrupt politicians and union leaders, and Russian and Italian mob leaders. Today he's going to talk about how on the heels of busting the mafia boss of Boston, named Bobby Luisi in 1999, which we're going to talk about in a future podcast, Mike did something that no other FBI special agent has ever done. He took down two other mafia families, one run by Matty Guglielmetti that controlled Rhode Island and New England, and another that was run by Carmen Denunzio, aka the Cheeseman, who had taken over Boston after the arrest of Bobby Luisi. To say that what Mike did took cojones, taking down not one, not two, but three mafia families, is almost a laughable understatement. Mike McGowan is today's hero behind the headlines.
Yeah, so what happens, we arrest in June of 99, and by this time, I'm now hooked on working undercover, and I'm hooked on working mob guys. I really enjoyed that case a lot, and people look at me like I'm crazy, but as an agent, you want to get better each case, and I basically got a PhD level of instruction by Luisi and his guys. I was basically embedded with them for 6 months. So I understood, how they think, talk, whatever. So I learned a great deal during that 6 months. And an opportunity presented itself less than 6 months later. We had an opportunity to target a very significant mob member of the Patriarca family down in Rhode Island, which is notorious for years. There was a member of that family who was about to be released from prison. And we had information that once he was released, he was going to try to position himself to become a boss. He was a captain. His name was Matty Guglielmetti. Again, public record. All of this is common knowledge. Guglielmetti was coming out of prison, and the Boston FBI also handles Rhode Island. So we have the same responsibility to, conduct an investigation. So we were able to, again, using an informant, we were able to be introduced not to Guglielmetti directly, but into his circle in early 2000. All right, so less than 6 months after the Luisi case, this other opportunity presents itself. I was approached and I was asked to do the assignment. I knew that this would be very, very different. This informant was crazy as a bedbug, not reliable. I didn't want anything to do with him other than the initial introduction. So that's the way, so this is what's referred to as basically a cold approach. I wasn't being introduced by a trusted member. So we knew going in that this cold approach would take literally years if we were to be successful.
At this point, had you testified in the Luisi trial?
I had not testified yet. That comes up later. There's a lot of people who second guess my decisions to work mob things so close to one another. But you have to understand, I'm not going to do anything foolish to hurt myself. If I have any concern, I'm just going to walk away. But you also have to recognize that It's an incredible challenge to be able to infiltrate a mob family. And, I had the bug. I wanted to do it. It wasn't, people think that I just went off half cocked and walked into a second mob. That's not anything for, other than my physical appearance, there was no way they could connect O'Sullivan to who ended up being Jameson in the next case. Okay, so I had to make sure that I didn't travel in circles where I might bump into somebody. But those families, the Luisi family in Boston and the Guglielmetti patriarcha crowd in Rhode Island, they had very little, if anything, to do with one another. So I thought it was a manageable risk. And again, I've been criticized why I would do this. Well, who more than me would not want to do something stupid? So I did it, and I knew I could back off anytime I wanted to. But
so you create a whole different persona for this case.
Yeah, his last name was Jameson. He was a very successful businessman out of the Midwest. Had nothing to do with Irish International or things falling off a truck. They're two different people. So other than being seen, it's not a concern. And, I was very careful to make sure that my new identity had no connection to this past. It's basically like meeting a new person. So unless I walked into a room, you got to remember, everybody I dealt with in the Luisi case went to jail. So they weren't going to walk into the restaurant where I was sitting. All right, they were all in jail. And we checked to make sure everybody remained in jail.
So you said there was an undercover who had a relationship with a guy who was close to Guglielmetti.
Yeah, not an undercover, an informant. So there was the informant, but like I said, I wanted nothing to do with this informant. I met him, I talked to him, he was nuts. So we set up, there was a gambling location that we knew that they would be at, and I literally walked in with the informant and got rid of him in maybe 2 minutes and then just continued on. But that's what's called a cold approach. When you do these things, you have nobody introducing you, so it's a completely different process.
Longer and more difficult, I would imagine.
Yeah, nobody knows you, nobody trusts you, nobody's vouching for you, so you have to make yourself attractive to them.
Okay, so describe the first, you go into this gambling club and
This was a gambling club in the middle of nowhere in New England. It literally was like out of a movie. It was very, very strange, but the bad guys that we wanted to meet were in there. So I went in there, I was all dressed up. I had a lot of cash on me. I ignored all the bad guys. Again, I learned so much during that Luisi case that it benefited me in the second infiltration. So rather than like seek them out, I just acted in a way that they came to me rather than me going to them. And inevitably that first night, the guy that we wanted to come forward came forward, and I ended up spending 3 or 4 hours with him.
Interesting. So you're just doing this by calling attention to yourself.
Not even calling attention. You're just acting in a way that they're like, who is this guy?
Who is this guy? Yeah.
He's got money. He looks nice. He's not, he's
a truck driver.
He's just somebody different who, you're curious.
What's he doing here?
Because the first thing they're thinking of is, how can we not rob him, but how can we play him for a mark? How can we take his money away from him? And I think that first night, and I'm not a gambler, but I think that first night I made a couple of $1,000s by luck, and they thought I was like, knew what I was doing. But this was all planned. This is all, people think you just walk in here and no, this was prepared, planned, strategized. I knew exactly what I wanted to accomplish, and that first meeting, I think we got double what we had hoped for.
So you go into that meeting knowing that there's somebody that you want to meet.
I knew exactly who I wanted to meet, and he ended up approaching me. I ignored him for the first hour, and then he just literally walked up, introduced himself, and we were off and running. When he looks back, he's going to say, wait a minute, this guy never asked me any question. I went to him. This is what I mean about learning from previous cases. You learn how to set yourself up in a way that they want to engage with you. And I wouldn't give him my phone number the first day. That drove him nuts.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm just not yet. Maybe next time type thing. What cop does that? They just, that's the way you got to make them think, because they're always going to look back. And whenever you do an undercover case, at some point the bad guy's going to say, wait a minute, how did I meet this guy? What were the circumstances? Well, he wouldn't even give me his phone number. He can't be an agent.
Right. And what is he like? What is Nardolino like?
He's like he was probably 6'3", about 250. He thought he was muscular. I thought he was fat. Fu Manchu mustache. He smoked nonstop. You'd never see him without a cigarette, which later was a problem because I'm allergic to cigarette smoke. I don't have a problem with Bobby Natalillo either, but he thinks he's a tough guy, and I think the jury's out on that. But I knew that Bobby Natalillo connected directly to Guglielmetti. So you don't get to pick and choose who you're gonna target. That was the guy that all the intelligence said you got to work your way through.
Okay, so now your object is to create a relationship with him, so he introduces you to Guglielmetti, correct?
Exactly. So Guglielmetti's not suspicious when he's introduced because now I've formed a relationship with this other guy. So we don't go directly at Guglielmetti, not that we could. And we had it planned, I told the case agents it's probably going to take me a year to meet Guglielmetti. It took me 18 months. But we did it the right way so that by the time we were introduced, he knew that at least Natalillo trusted me.
Mike makes what he did sound matter of fact. The truth is, the men he was dealing with on a daily basis were ruthless criminals. They routinely shook down businesses, made corrupt deals with union bosses and politicians, trafficked drugs, and were involved in prostitution. Matty good-looking Guglielmetti was a second-generation mobster who had been taped by the FBI during a secret ceremony while he was being inducted into the mob. He pleaded guilty to federal racketeering and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Upon his release, and shortly before Mike met him, he was considered the prime candidate to take over the notorious Patriarca crime family, which had ruthlessly reigned over organized crime in New England since the 50s. Before he could meet Guglielmetti, Mike had to win the trust of his associate, strip club manager and thug, Bobby Nardolillo. It took him a year and a half of hanging out every night with Nardolillo and using him to broker a deal for a strip club in Orlando before he met Guglielmetti. These were highly guarded, vicious men. The slightest slip-up with any of them, and they would have no hesitation putting a bullet in Mike's head and dumping his body where it would never be found.
We knew that they were tied into strip clubs down in Rhode Island. There was a strip club in Rhode Island called Centerfolds, and they had a regular presence there. So when they first met me and I introduced myself, I was moving from the Midwest into New England, and I was going to get in construction, but I also was an investor. I had a lot of money, which makes me attractive.
How had you made your money?
In parking garages, because parking garages at that time were all cash business, right? They loved that. So again, this is the FBI strategy. You bring them an all cash business. You can launder money. You can hide funds, blah, blah, blah. You have a construction background. We knew that they were tied into the construction industry in Rhode Island. So, you don't make yourself too good to be true, but you make yourself attractive. So here's a guy who's made some money. He's interested in strip clubs. He's interested in construction. Mm-hmm. Let's see what we can do together.
And you have to backstop. So you have to build this whole profile.
We joined the Parking Garage Companies of America. We did all the things that a parking garage guy would do.
So you create a whole history. Do you have to go back and even create like birth certificates? And
again, I don't want to get into the trade craft, but when you know somebody's going to look at you, the FBI and the federal government have incredible resources to make you be somebody that you may not be.
Right.
And we know, in this specific case that we're addressing, they hired private eyes and attorneys, and I passed every test.
Wow, so they completely checked you out.
Soup to nuts, yep.
So you start working with Nardolino. You meet him at the strip club at Centerfolds. Is that where you guys were meeting?
Well, I had a company in Rhode Island, an office, but probably 75 or 80% of the meetings took place on their turf, which was the club. So I would go there. At the beginning, I'd go there almost every day, and I'd have to spend 6, 8, 12 hours just getting trusted,
just hanging there, having drinks,
just being who you're supposed to be. But the thing I learned from the Luisi case versus this case was, in the Luisi case, I was kind of a low-end businessman, In this case, I had already made my money, so I didn't have to hustle for work. I had plenty of money in the bank. Matter of fact, at one point, we left a bank statement on the table that showed I can't remember, it showed whatever I had, like let's say I had $2 million in the bank. They get on the phone and they don't think that I knew that they looked at it. They tell somebody else, "Hey, this guy's got $6 million." They helped with the backstopping themselves. So, but I was flush.
Yeah, and that attracted them.
They were sniffing around like big time. And again, not to rob. They're not gonna stab you and shoot you and take your money. They want to use your money to further their organization. Because then I told them I was interested in investing in a club, because we also knew we had this plan already in place that when we went to do this investment, we were going to have issues, and that's where I was going to ask for Guglielmetti's help.
Mike had two tasks. One, to win the trust of highly suspicious and dangerous mobsters like Nardolillo and Guglielmetti, so that they would feel comfortable enough to involve him in their criminal activities. And two, to follow all the legal steps and collect all the evidence so federal prosecutors can convince a judge and jury and make a successful case. In order to do this, he had to create a convincing undercover profile. So he carefully built the cover of a successful businessman from the Midwest who had recently moved to New England and was looking to invest in strip clubs and get into construction. And he made it known that he was willing, as Mike puts it, to color outside the lines. It was his interest in a strip club in Orlando and his need for a mob sponsor that he hoped would earn him his first face-to-face meeting with Matty Guglielmetti.
So for this past year, Guglielmetti's been hearing about me, but he's not meeting with me, which I didn't expect him to be. But we're going to need his influence when this problem happens.
Right. So you're planning ahead, way ahead. 5 moves
You got to
ahead.
be
Yeah.
you got to be 5 or 6 steps ahead, or you're screwed. Yep.
Right.
So if you're successful, everything you do is going to later be examined by a judge or a jury. Every recording. All right. So to address those, I tell them I'm not a big drinker. All right. I might have a beer, and then I have a water. Okay. I don't want to drink. I drank in an earlier case with some Russians, and I don't want to do that. I learned from experience. I also introduce an FBI female agent as my girlfriend. And if I'm looking to invest in a strip club, I'm not going to mix business and pleasure. So you have to establish this all up front. And they liked that. They thought I was like a really astute businessman. You know, I'm walking around in a strip club. There's millions of women in there, obviously. I'm not going to do anything.
You're not interested.
No.
Yeah.
I'm a businessman.
You're looking at this as strictly a business opportunity.
Exactly. And I would tell them, listen, you know, you got to get control of your staff, because, you know, they're gonna say the wrong thing to the wrong guy, and then the cops are going to be in here and blah, blah, blah. So you know it's coming. I mean, you just set the rules early on. And then when you do go to court, you know, the jury appreciates when you lay this all out, that these considerations were addressed in such and such a way. We try to be as professional as possible.
So you don't want the jury to think, well, this guy was taking advantage of these girls and so on and so forth. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, because that could sway their sympathy.
So so any of that nonsense, women, drinking, money, you just knock it down right off the bat.
And the Luisi trial is happening in this period, or does that come later?
While I'm doing the Guglielmetti case, after I was introduced and after I met Nardolillo and we were running and gunning with him, the Luisi case came to trial. Now, oftentimes, criminal defendants plead guilty and there is no trial. In Boston, all of the defendants except Luisi pled guilty. So none of them went to trial, but Luisi went to trial. So now I have to testify at Luisi's trial, and that happens while I'm meeting with Guglielmetti. We knew that was a possibility. All I can do is, testify. Hopefully no one pays attention to the testimony. Matter of fact, I testified against Luisi in the morning and met with Guglielmetti the same night. So
Wow.
that was really serious. Now it's like you have an agent testifying in one mob trial where 90 miles away he's meeting with other. So one of our bosses, who had not been on the streets for many years, suggested that if I shaved my mustache, this beautiful mustache, the mobsters in Rhode Island wouldn't recognize me. And I'm not sure how that was going to work because, you take off the mustache, you still can't do anything with this face. And I had a case agent at the time who was a really, really funny guy, and on his own, because we were incredulous. We just looked at each other.
Right.
We thought he was goofing
was
on us,
serious.
but he was dead serious. And so the case agent went and wrote up an official FBI memo to get me bikini wax, liposuction, and a hair transplant. And he actually submitted it through the official chain of command, where it was signed by more than one person, and we had a field day with that. And I had one caller in one of the interviews I did kind of bark at me about why we would do something so silly. You got to understand, this is really serious work. Going over undercover against the mob, it's not like child's play. You have to have a release valve. You have to have a couple of laughs.
Right.
And that's all that was. We were just trying to be, it's not soft. Well, maybe it is sophomoric, but you know what? You can't be dead serious all the time. All right. If you can't laugh, then there's something wrong with you. And again, the beauty of working undercover work is even when you're with the bad guys, you're laughing more than anything else. So you can have a good time doing this and still do your job.
It might seem incredible and even reckless that while Mike was meeting with Nardolillo, he was still testifying against Bobby Luisi and his mob associates from Boston. But Mike understood the risks he was taking, and he did what he could to mitigate them. He did that by developing two distinct covers. Mike O'Sullivan was an Irishman who ran an import business out of Boston's Logan Airport, and Mike Jameson was a successful parking lot owner and businessman from the Midwest. Mike also knew that the different mob families didn't communicate much with one another. Still, if one of Guglielmetti's associates walked into the courtroom while he was testifying against Luisi, Mike was toast.
So we had now been dealing with Nardolillo for over a year, and the FBI made the decision that we were going to segue again into the drug world because we knew that they were involved in drug trafficking. And again, they knew I had a lot of money. And what we ended up coming up with was a lot of my money that I made was from legitimate business, but a lot more money came from illegitimate business in terms of money laundering, where I would clean the money of dope dealers. So no one had a problem with that, and I just mentioned it. And again, they can walk away from it at that point. Well, they jumped all over that. And this time we came up with a scenario where they were going to protect some drugs that we were transporting through the state of Rhode Island. So I brought an undercover friend of mine in from another state who portrayed a major drug trafficker, and he negotiated with Nardolillo, not Guglielmetti, but he negotiated, if you watch our product for X amount of hours, so it's not stolen, we'll pay you X amount of dollars, which is just another form of drug trafficking. It's the same penalties.
Because they're taking possession of it.
Well,
right?
They're taking possession of it, and they know what it is. You don't tell them it's like Chinese food. You basically take out kilos in front of them and discuss it with other undercovers. So we set up so that was the first major step with Nardolillo. We did this they're called drug protection detail. We did this protection detail, and it went off without a hitch. And, he made money, and he told me that some of the money went to Guglielmetti. Again, nothing we could prove at the time. But now Guglielmetti, not only am I a astute businessman, I now knock around with drug traffickers. So walk away if you want.
Now, then there's a circumstance where you meet him, correct?
Well, what happened with we don't go into the drugs with him at first. I'm now going to invest. I want to buy a strip club in Tampa, Florida. Why Tampa, Florida? Because at the time, Tampa, Florida had no like organized mafia leadership there. It was all decimated from some arrests and prosecutions. Tampa was not as organized as the Northeast. So it was a gamble because if New England had checked with real Tampa bad guys, we were in trouble. But we're a year and a half into this case. I hadn't met Guglielmetti. It was time to push the envelope. So I went to Natalillo. I told him I'm having a problem down there. I didn't even have to ask. He volunteered that Guglielmetti would act as a representative of me with the Tampa. So we go down to Tampa, and the Tampa mobster is actually another undercover agent, a friend of mine. And that's where I'm first introduced to Guglielmetti, 18 months into the case.
So basically you're saying, I'm trying to buy a strip club in Tampa, and I need your protection, or I need your help?
I need to operate under your authority. Yeah, I need your help because I'm getting braced by a wise guy down there.
Oh, who is another undercover agent?
Yes, but you got to understand, and at least in this time period, this is now 2000 to 2005, almost every strip club in America had some type of organized crime nexus. It was everywhere. So when I tried to legitimately buy into a Tampa club, this Tampa mobster popped up saying, you have to make an arrangement through me. And now I'm acting like I'm scared, or I don't know how this works. So I'm asking for the mob
to help me out
in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, all planned, all strategized.
Right. And this
was the way we were going to flush Guglielmetti out.
And so how did that work?
He flew to Tampa to represent me, and that I was introduced to him on that trip. I went to the meeting with the other undercover.
Yeah.
And then Guglielmetti and I, and this is a friend of mine that was sitting across from him, that he's threatening me, and it's just it's a role playing scenario, but it's important, and it was believable because Guglielmetti bought it hook, line, and sinker.
He didn't know this guy. He had no relationship.
They were throwing names around. You got to remember, as FBI agents, we know all the right names. So, oh yeah, what about him? What about her? But, he bought him within 5 minutes. He was convinced he was a mobster.
Wow. And what was Guglielmetti like when you met him?
I thought he was very intelligent, very careful, very egotistical, which they all are, but just a careful mobster. You got to understand, I studied Guglielmetti's history. I knew his dad had been a mobster. I knew everything about Guglielmetti, but I'm acting as if I'm just being introduced to him for the first time. So I'm able to ask all kinds of questions. And these guys love being mobsters. Every mobster's favorite character is this.
You need my help, huh?
Yeah, exactly. All right. And I played this intelligent but naive mob person. Hey, how does this whole stuff work? Why is this guy like bugging me? Why can't I just buy this property straight out? Why does this guy tell me I got to give him tribute? I don't get this. What's this? Oh, here's why. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So he's like taking you under his wing.
He's educating me.
And then he's going to get a cut for his help.
Again, it's not like you can have a formal contract with these people.
Right.
Like a regular business deal. So Guglielmetti jumps in because he's going to expect tribute or payment. So I have to throw him a couple of $1,000s for his help. All right. It's not like it's on paper and it's agreed to and would hold up in court. But now I'm operating under his name. If anyone checks in Rhode Island for Matty Guglielmetti, he's a big deal.
So they're not going to mess with him.
Yeah. And I don't want you to think this happens just to undercover agents. There's hundreds of associates and earners who do the same thing. You'll have plumbers, you'll have house painters that, hey, I'm with so-and-so. Okay. And they expect everybody to kick in.
So they help get me jobs, and then I pay them a percentage.
Exactly. Green makes the world go round. It's nothing different in organized crime. They wake up every day. How can I make money? Guglielmetti, we put him in a nice hotel. We flew him down. We bought him dinner.
Treated him well.
But again, it's his choice, walk away or play.
Okay, so now you meet him, and how does the relationship develop from there?
Well, he was very involved in the Rhode Island construction industry, and the FBI had created a construction company. So we had something in common right then. He knew about my interest in the strip clubs. Obviously, he knew about my construction. But again, we have to spend time together, and for him to get to know me, to like me, to want to work with me. So the next 6 months is just developing that relationship. There's not one word about drugs, okay? There's not one word about criminal activity initially, but it's understood, I'm not adverse to throwing some money around if I have to make something happen.
And where are you meeting him? Are you meeting him at Centerfolds, or are you meeting him somewhere else?
I met him everywhere. He would come to the office. I'd meet him out at construction sites. I'd meet him. He liked to play tennis. I met him at a tennis court. We just go about. I'd be down in the Rhode Island area, and sometimes he'd call me if we had a reason to call him.
It might sound crazy, but as Mike explains, making a successful undercover case is all about building relationships. Some of the mobsters he dealt with he grew to like. Most of the time he was in the company of mobsters, hanging out in strip clubs and restaurants. They were talking about mundane stuff like food, girlfriends, sports, and current events. Talk of illegal activities was kept to a minimum. Although Mike wore a wire, he was operating on his own. He had to act casual while always being on guard. One wrong word, one slip up, and he was dead.
And at this point, I can finally kind of kick Natalillo to the side, which is all I wanted to do, and just deal directly with Matty. Now he's dealing with the construction industry. He's dealing with the laborers union. He's trying to get us work. He ended up helping us get the FBI, using legitimate professional subcontractors, we did an asbestos removal job, construction job. So, we were the real deal. We had to join the union. We had to do all the normal stuff.
You had to have subcontractors,
yep,
and so on, so you could actually fulfill the work if he got it for you.
Yeah, you had to perform. Yep.
And you're running all that.
Well, I was supported by other undercover agents who actually knew those businesses. Like I had an accountant, I had a construction guy. I was the boss. I can't even bang a nail in straight. But I had, there was an FBI agent who had previously been a construction manager. So we just, we do it legitimately. We find all the people who have these skill sets. But I'm running with Guglielmetti to the point that basically he becomes the silent partner in my business, which is
in your construction company.
Yeah, which is what we wanted, because by then, now I'm not going to do anything without his permission, meaning both legally and illegally. So we're running around with construction projects. We're doing little criminal stuff now, but basically we know that he's already heard about my drug stuff with Natalillo. So it's just a matter of when that opportunity presents itself.
Okay. But right now it's all pretty much legitimate.
Mostly legitimate, but I make it clear to him. Again, I use a term in training, color outside the lines. Okay? That no one's admitting anything, but if you say that from one human being to another, you're up to no good. So I made it clear that I color outside the lines when it benefits me. And, just leave it there.
And he just keeps that in the back of his head. He doesn't respond right away.
He doesn't respond, and I don't push it. All right? But then he sees me. We did, like I said, we left that bank statement on the desk one day. This guy's got $2 million in the bank. From what? He's done one construction job. He didn't make $2 million. And then you got to remember, I had introduced the undercover agent I introduced to Natalillo. He might as well just have dope dealer tattooed on his forehead. He just looks like a dope dealer. So, you just plop the seeds out and let them collect them.
So they know that Jameson, which is your undercover identity, has a lot of money in the bank, has relationships with drug dealers, and is willing to, launder money for them.
Right, but you do it professionally, which they appreciate. You're not like sloppy. You're not doing, who you introduce, how you introduce them, what car they're driving. They just put the pieces together. Okay, I always had a ton of money. All right, literally, the FBI would give me, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. I had $10 in
just flash money.
$10 in my real pocket, right. But I was a player. I looked the part. So that's what they are attracted to.
Okay, and this is now we're talking about like 2 years in by now, right?
This is 2 to 3 years in. Yep. But again, we have to go slow with Guglielmetti because number one, he's very smart, and number two, he doesn't want to go back to jail. People don't understand when somebody's been in jail and they come back out, the only place they don't want to go is back. So just like Luisi, just like Natalillo, just like 100 other guys I dealt with, if somebody's already been incarcerated, they don't want to go back. So in my simple world, you just don't have to commit crimes and you won't go back. But if you choose to commit crimes, that's your gamble. There's something known as predication. There's a legal term called predication. It means somebody's willing to do criminal activity. Okay, all of these guys were heavily predicated. Okay, we don't go up to some innocent soul and say, hey, you want to launder money? Okay, there has to be a track record of what they're involved in. So we knew that we were dealing with heavily predicated subjects who so even though you're doing that, if they don't like you or they don't believe you or they don't trust you, they just walk away. When you do undercover work, literally, and this goes for every case I ever worked, if the guy doesn't pick up the phone the next day, that's fine. He can walk away. It's their choice, not the FBI's.
When does it start to turn into criminal activity?
All right, so we did the first drug protection detail with Natalillo and his people. We then start to infer we're going to do some more. Because now I know that Natalillo, because of comments made by Guglielmetti, I know that Natalillo has told Guglielmetti about my undercover drug dealer friend. So now that Guglielmetti and I are silent partners in our business, I tell him one day, basically, I make money laundering drug proceeds. If you don't want to do that, tell me now because I won't do it. All right? He doesn't answer either yes or no. He's absorbing all this. He's thinking. And I tell him that I'm about to do a money laundering deal using the company. And I won't do that unless he's okay with that. All right? So he's got to make a decision. He comes back to me and he says, Mike, I trust you, but you tell me more than I need to know. He's telling me, go ahead and do it, but leave me out of it. Don't tell me because I'm going to get in trouble. So I have to lay it out completely.
Yeah.
No, Matty, this is how it works, okay?
Yeah, I want you to know.
You need to know this because once you say yes or no, then I'll do it, whatever you tell me. So I'm giving him options, all right? Money laundering is a very tricky violation. You have to know what criminal activity that the money being laundered comes from. So you have to make it clear. It can be drug trafficking, it can be prescription fraud, it can be any type of criminal violation, but the bad guy or the subject of a money laundering case has to know that money is dirty and why it's dirty. So I had to have these long discussions with him. And again, this comes after a year or so of building up trust and confidence. And then we have another conversation where, and this was really what kind of pushed the case over the edge. I told you all these mobsters love themselves. They love to talk about it when they're comfortable. In 1989, in October of 1989, in Medford, Massachusetts, the FBI recorded the only mafia induction ceremony ever. So you've always heard about mafia induction ceremonies where they prick the finger and burn the cards. There was a case in Massachusetts where that was recorded by an FBI informant. It's the only time it's ever happened. Guglielmetti was one of the participants. He was there making these other mobsters.
So he was presiding?
He was he's already a made member, so he's like one of the elderlies there. All right? And this was a huge deal at the time. Huge, massive. So now fast forward 10 years later, or more, he says offhand one time, he says, well, I got in some trouble in Massachusetts. I know immediately what he's talking about. I'm an organized crime agent. Well, I don't say, well, is that the thing that happened in Medford? I said, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, there was this thing in the government and blah, blah, blah. I said, no, explain it to me. So at this point, we have a relationship where he lays out the whole induction ceremony, which he went to jail for, and he never opened his mouth. He went to jail for physically just being present.
But now he's admitting.
Now
that
he's admitting, and he says to me during this thing, he said, Mike, the first time before he went to jail, I did it for the glory. Now I'm in it for the money. So he's blessing this. He's blessing these money laundering events. So within a week, I launder whatever, and I give him $18,000 cash. Once he takes that cash and he knows it's from drug trafficking, he's going to jail. So now we have the case, but we need additional evidence. So now I do more protection details, but now Matty is front and center. So he lines up the workers on that guy, the guys who are going to guard it, the guys who are going to watch. We do this whole elaborate scheme. He believed we were moving 67 kilos of cocaine.
Okay, and what does that look like?
It looks like 3 big hockey bags filled with bricks that each weigh 2.2 pounds. It's about 150 pounds worth of cocaine, which is probably valued at that time. That would have been valued at probably $10 to $15 million. And we were paying him $1,000 per kilo for a $67,000 payday to basically babysit the dope for, a number of hours. We have to use real cocaine in order to legally charge them with it. So, that's scary because they can decide to rob us. And we later found out that Natalillo wanted us robbed in one of the details and told his guy to rob us, but the guy elected not to. So it can be pretty dangerous.
Wow.
So we make this elaborate ruse. He okays it, green lights it, all on video and audio. We finally do the thing. Him and I spend the whole night together. We're like running both of our crews, and it's fantastic evidence. It's just overwhelming evidence. You have a captain in the Patriarca family sitting with an undercover FBI agent on video, on audio, directing a major drug deal. 2 days later, he comes to get paid, and 2 FBI agents walk in the room and place him under arrest. And he turns to me. He looked right at me. Now I had been with him for 3 years. He was shocked. He never put it together. And I told him, Matty, do the right thing. And that was the last day I saw him.
Before that, you had gotten so close. I think you were at his father's funeral. His father died.
Yeah. This is where life intrudes into, work. His dad was a mafia member for many years. His dad died during this case. He was very close to his dad. They had the service, which I had to attend, obviously. And then the day of the funeral, it was wintertime. The day of the funeral, I paid my respects. And I didn't want to go. I had to. But there was no, criminal activity being discussed that day. I went to the service hoping just to poke my head in and out, make sure he saw me. And as I was leaving, Natalillo grabbed me, and with his family and just a few close friends, he pulled me into the burial crypt. So here's this family, in the time of sorrow, and I felt like crap. I was recording. I had to. I just moved to the furthest point I could and got out of there as soon as I could. But that's how close we had become. It's my business partner, and he's and it was truly legitimate sorrow at his father's passing, and I'm sitting in there with a recorder on, so that wasn't a good day either.
So Guglielmetti's arrested. How long had this lasted now?
This case itself took 5 years, which is a very, very long time for an undercover operation. That's 5 years of, living in that double life type thing and going to work every day with them. That's one of the longest ever in the FBI. I knew it would take a while. I didn't think it would take 5 years.
So he goes to trial?
No, what happened was Guglielmetti, we arrested him when he came to get his payment, and within days, if maybe a week. He was so embarrassed that he had been bamboozled by the FBI. He pled guilty within a week.
Wow.
He just wanted to go straight to jail. Natalillo went to, he had suppression hearings where they try to suppress the evidence, but those came out in the government's favor. So I had to testify against Natalillo, but not Guglielmetti. So we arrested, I can't remember how many people we arrested. Guglielmetti was the top arrest. He pled guilty. But after you make an arrest, especially after 5 years, you have literally a year or more of preparation for court. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into the prosecution phase. So I was just, and I needed a break. I mean, 5 years straight. I wanted to go home, at a normal hour. So I just spent the next year or so, getting ready to go to court, basically.
So you've got to go through all the recordings, all the transcripts.
Yeah, that case there, I think, if I remember correctly, there were over 3,500 recordings.
Wow.
And we have to listen to every one. And some of them are literally, they're 12 hours long. That's the part people never see, the prosecution steps. But it's, until you put them in a jail cell, that's your job. So as we're preparing for the Rhode Island trial, now during the Guglielmetti case, the 5-year Rhode Island case, I worked with 3 other undercover agents. I mentioned the construction guy, the accountant. There was also an agent who used the name Mike Sullivan. He came on as kind of my second-hand man. He was a new undercover. We were breaking him in. He had a lot to learn, but he worked very hard. When the Guglielmetti case ended, he went to work on the organized crime squad. And about a year later, he came to me and said, hey, we got a chance to do an undercover against the Cheese Man.
With Matty Guglielmetti under arrest, Mike was ready to shift his focus to a new case. Carmen Denunzio was a 400-pound mob boss known as the Cheese Man because he operated out of a cheese shop on Endicott Street in the north end of Boston. He had taken over the Boston mob after the arrest of Bobby Luisi and had previously pled guilty to extortion and spent 4 years in a federal prison. Like most of the organized crime bosses Mike had dealt with, he was willing to do practically anything to make a buck. In this case, sell 300,000 cubic yards of highly contaminated loam to be used in the massive Big Dig construction project in Boston. This time, Mike played the role of a corrupt state official who, for a price, would approve the sale of the contaminated loam.
So here, because of the unique plan that they had, they didn't think I'd have direct access to Denunzio, but I would have, clear access to some others. And the way the case was structured, I'd have probably a dozen meetings or less. So this wasn't going to be, six months every day, 5 years. This is just in and out, do your thing. You're this corrupt official. What they wanted to do, these mobsters wanted basically, in layman's terms, they wanted to sell toxic loom to the project out here called the Big Dig. There's a massive construction project. They were going to have a greenway with all trees and flowers and grass, and the mob wanted to sell literally toxic loom to the state.
And loom is just dirt, right?
Dirt.
For planning, right? Yeah.
I didn't know until this case, dirt is very complicated,
right.
But yeah, to you and I, it's dirt, okay? But there's a lot to know about dirt, believe it or not. But again, this is what I mean about the mob wakes up just trying to make money. So if they can sell poison dirt to you, they will. And I kind of chuckled because, believe me, I had never worked a dirt case before. And I actually had to be trained. People laugh about this, but I had to be trained by state officials, legitimate state officials in Massachusetts, about dirt composition, dirt differences. I had to learn because if I'm supposed to be a state inspector, because these guys had a dirt farm owner in their pocket who knows the business. So we laugh about this, but I literally had to go to like dirt school for a couple of days, and it later proved to be very, very valuable. It just, again, shows you these preparation phases of these things. If you're going to say you're somebody, you better know what you're talking about. And by that point, I was experienced enough to know that I didn't know a lot about a lot of things. So if I could learn, I went to learn, and I did. I was able to talk the talk with the dirt owner, which convinced the mob to do the deal.
So they had a dirt farmer, like I don't know what you call them, but a guy who had dirt.
It's like a sand and gravel company who had told them, I got all this crap that won't pass muster.
Why? Because it's contaminated with chemicals, or
it's contaminated. Yeah. Exactly. It's like poison. It's like it's really bad. But this is a scheme that they came up with, and they came to an FBI informant and said, "Hey, we're trying to get rid of this toxic loam. Can you help us out?" And that's how the whole thing started. It sounds stupid. It sounds like silly, but imagine if it actually happened. It would be Chernobyl in Boston. So that's how they came to me. It was basically, can you be this state inspector that fudges the paperwork so that this can get approved? And in return, I was going to be paid bribes by them, and this is a perfect federal violation. So there's no drug trafficking. I mentioned drug trafficking in the other cases. This was a criminal scheme created by the mob that we learned about, and we jumped right into the middle.
They just needed a corrupt official to say it was okay.
They went to the informant who had previously worked with the state to say, hey, do you know a guy in the state who can basically fudge the paperwork? Yes.
Okay, and that was going to be you.
Right.
So you assume a whole new identity. You have the badge and the truck and all the.
Yeah, we tell a story in training. I'm supposed to be a corrupt state official. By this time, I've been undercover now for years and years and years. So I now know that I didn't know a lot before, and I'm starting to learn more. So the first thing I do when I have this assignment is to go to dirt school. Hey, somebody's got to teach me this stuff. When I'm at dirt school, the state, and they were great, the state of Massachusetts was great to me. Not only did they teach me about dirt, they gave me a state truck. They gave me, the construction hat, the vest. And the first meeting, I come flying into this dirt farm, flying in this state truck, which I barely can control. And I'm doing donuts and circles. And we tell the story in the book. You remember when I came flying in there and did all this crazy stuff, I then got out and I urinated on the tire, and then I shook the guy's hand without washing my hands. And everybody laughs about that. But my point in training is, this guy's now seen this clown for 5 minutes. The last thing he's thinking is, this is an FBI agent. What
FBI agent would act like this?
Who could come in here like this and do all these silly things? And I also called him by the wrong name on purpose. So now he's irate, but he's not thinking, I'm worried this could be, the government. So it's just,
and this is the dirt farmer you're meeting.
I'm meeting the dirt farmer and one of Denunzio's underlings. So one mob guy and the dirt farmer. And I know this is going to get back to Denunzio.
Right, of course.
Right?
Of course.
The mob guy's he's like irate. He's the one I called by the wrong name. And the dirt farmer's like, this is a typical state inspector acting like an idiot. But it was, it was very effective. It set the tone for the rest of the case. Because all I cared about, I would fudge any paperwork. I told them this. I'd fudge anything once you take care of me. And that first day, within 15 minutes of that first meeting, they offered me, I believe it was a $15,000 bribe in 15 minutes. So we've already pushed the case forward. After 2 years of, spinning their wheels, they want this to go forward. But again, I tell them that I'm not making any deal unless I get assurances from the top, meaning we have to flush out Denunzio. And a lot of the FBI people thought that Denunzio wouldn't come out, but having spent the time with Luisi and spent the time with Guglielmetti, I knew how to push those buttons. And I was like, well, that's fine, but nothing's happening unless he sticks his head out. And sure enough, a week later, I have a one-on-one with Denunzio.
Where does that take place?
That's a funny story too, is there's a famous it's no longer here. There's a famous restaurant outside of Boston called the Hilltop Restaurant, and it's on a major thoroughfare, but it has like a huge cactus and a huge cow as the landmarks, and it's famous. Everybody knows what it is. So I tell him to meet me. I get a message to Denunzio, meet me at the Hilltop at 4:00. Okay, and I had also learned that mob guys are very, very big on punctuality. Believe it or not, they want things to happen on time. So Denunzio gets there at 4:00. I'm sitting across the highway. I can see him show up, and I wait about 30 minutes to pull over. So now he's been standing in the parking lot. He's 400 pounds. It's hot out. The sun is beating down. And my instructions from the case agent going into the meeting was basically poke him, see if you can get him to threaten you. At this point, I'm pretty experienced at undercover work now, and I have these little techniques that I use that I learned, and within 5 minutes, I'm dead serious, he wanted to strangle me. He was so angry at me, he wanted to stick a hatchet in my head. But again, just like the dirt farm, there's no way he's thinking I'm an agent.
This is what makes Mike the best at what he does. If you were a mob boss, would you ever imagine an undercover cop or FBI officer acting the way Mike did, doing donuts with a state truck, pissing in public, or keeping a mobster waiting in the blazing sun? Mike refers to this technique as mind-fucking or poking the beast.
And I also, this was critical, I made believe that I had no idea who he was. Now here he is, the number 2 guy in the mob in Boston, and I'm like, cheese? Nah, never heard of you, nope.
Yeah.
Don't know anything about you. And we start talking about dieting.
Yeah.
And, I'm
Crazy.
like, maybe you're thinking about, I'm starting to recommend diets to him. And he's just losing his mind. But again, and, we laugh, but at the same time, it's very, very effective to take their eye off the ball. We're about to talk about bribe. We're about to talk about crime, but, I'm talking about this guy losing weight. And now he's angry. So that first meeting went incredibly well. He gave up the bribes. He basically talked himself into federal prison that day. And we had thought we were going to need, a dozen or so meetings. Really, after the first meeting, we had what they hadn't been able to get for years. I met with him a few more times just to clean things up. But because of the way the case agents had set up that scenario, you got to pay bribes, you got to do this, you got to do that. I was just like checking the boxes. And on tape, he admitted, they needed to pay bribes, that it was poison and all the elements of the crime. We picked up that in 30 minutes.
And so you were insisting on meeting him because he was the final boss. I want to meet the top boss. I want to make sure this is all legitimate.
I kept telling, because the underling who was with the dirt farmer at that first meeting, he was kind of a half-ass wannabe wise guy. We had other evidence, but we didn't think we'd get Denunzio out, but we thought we'd get somebody that we knew of. So by aiming for Denunzio, if somebody else in his pecking order had come, we would have dealt with that, but he decided to handle it himself. And again, these are the challenges and risks you take. If we walked away, we can't insist on meeting the big guy and then do the deal. So, I don't do any of this. I don't make any of these decisions on my own. The case agents and the supervisors have to say, yes, see if he'll threaten you, see if you can walk away. So we have it all planned out, and he bit.
So you get him on tape talking about exactly what the case is, the bribe, how much money you're going to get.
Yeah, every step in every criminal act that he's going to be charged with, I'm able to go through it with him on tape in order for him to convince me it's worth my interest to do the deal, okay? And again, he knows he shouldn't be. He's talking to a complete stranger. The first time he's meeting this man. But again, because of the stupid truck and showing up late and the diet.
It doesn't even
it never even
occur to him. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, had you showed up clean cut, and he probably would have gone, who is this guy? Yeah.
You know, and this is the benefit of working years and years doing this stuff. You learn human nature. You learn how to manipulate people. And again, I keep emphasizing for your audience sake, anyone can walk. Denunzio didn't have to show up at that meeting. If he never showed up, he's not going to jail. That's why we have them meet us. We don't drive them or we don't go to their homes. Hey, if you want to do something, meet the guy 4 o'clock.
Okay, so you gather all the evidence, and it sounds like it went like swimmingly, right?
Yeah, the first meeting was the critical meeting. We got pretty much everything. I think I met him 3 or 4 times total, but it was all just like, we also had to stretch out this scenario. You know, they think they're selling us this, so we had to talk about truck hauling and all that stuff. But the main meeting, that first meeting, got the criminal conversation. So I met with him, I think, 3 or 4 more times, and that was it.
And then someone else does the arrest?
Yeah, I go back to my regular work, and that's the thing that people don't understand. If you work undercover, you do your specialty, and then you remove yourself. So they're finishing up with the case. I don't know anything that's going on, and I don't even know when he's going to be arrested.
So the day he's arrested, you bump into him, is that right?
The day he was arrested, which I had no idea he was being arrested. It's like a year later.
Okay, so you've kind of lost track of...
I don't pay any attention, truthfully, and people don't understand. I did my part. I'm on to the next one. So now on this day, I don't even know they're going to arrest him. At that time, I used to go to work early and go to the gym first. So I would go to the gym at 5 and be out of the gym at 6 a.m. So at 6 a.m., I'm done with my workout, going back to my office, and the elevator doors ping open. And I turn, and it's 2 good friends of mine, both holding on to Carmen. And this wasn't planned, and I did a double take, and he did a double take. And I just said, naturally, I said, "Hey, Carmen, how's it going?" And he looked at me, and it took a second, and then everything fell in place. God. And I won't use the word he used, but he said out loud, he said, "Oh, man, I'm screwed."
What FBI Special Agent Mike McGowan had accomplished in less than 5 years is simply astounding. He had infiltrated 2 mob families that led to the arrest of 2 organized crime bosses and dozens of their associates. One of those was Bobby Luisi, who we will feature in a future podcast. By arresting the cheese man in Boston, Mike had stopped the sale of tons of contaminated loam, thus avoiding thousands of potential cases of cancer to children and families who would have picnicked in the parks where it would have been spread. In arresting Matty Guglielmetti, he uncovered a nest of union corruption throughout New England that had robbed countless millions from taxpayers over the years. He had also helped stop the distribution of narcotics to local communities. This was just a small part of what Mike accomplished, and an even smaller part of the 50 cases that he was involved in over his career. Mike talks about this like it was no big deal, but it was a huge deal. And even though he's not well known, he's made an enormous impact. That's why we're honored that he's today's hero behind the headlines. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Ralph Pizzullo. Please subscribe, and don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Heroes Behind Headlines.